not so educated. You know, when some people, you know, kind of, well, you know, you follow that, you know, rubbish, and you must be an idiot to follow that. These people during this time, there were educated people. They were scribes that followed Jesus. And so scribes were these guys. There was very few people that could read and write, and the scribes were extremely educated. Many of them, you know, could speak and write 3 different languages. And Matthew tells us about one of the scribes, and he says, "I will follow you, meaning Jesus. I'll follow you anywhere you go." And so he ends up picking this group of guys. And here's what's interesting: being a doubter or an unbeliever doesn't disqualify you from following Jesus. All of the guys that he selected, all of these guys, all the people that followed him, at some point or another, they pushed the unfollow button. They pushed it. These guys, you know, were with Jesus, and at times they had their doubts. They had their questions over and over again. And so, I don't know about you, but that's encouraging for me. Because like you, maybe you've had doubts. Maybe you've had questions. And so, let's take a look at some of these earliest followers of Jesus. So, Jesus now, he's finished temptation area. He's entering his ministry. He's looking to select these guys. And so he's going from synagogues to different synagogues, and he's teaching. And he's doing some healing. And so he's in an area around the Sea of Galilee, around Capernaum. And one of the largest fishing, you know, cities in that area would have been a significant amount of people. It was big enough to have its own synagogue. And so he's there and he's teaching, and people are getting familiar with him, and news has been spreading, and some of John the Baptist people are hanging around. And so a guy by the name of Simon. Do we remember what Simon's name is changed to later on? Peter, exactly. But this guy at this point, his name's Simon. And Simon, you know, is interested. Jesus has captured his attention. And he knows there's something different. There's something unusual about Jesus that's different than anybody else. And so he invites him to his house, and he's got an agenda. Because whenever they get to the house, his mother-in-law has been sick. And so Jesus comes in there, and he asks Jesus, said, "Hey, do you think you could heal my mother-in-law?" And Jesus does. He heals her. He does such a great job in the healing that we read where she gets up, and it's kind of like so many of you good moms, you know, "You guys look hungry? Let me fix you something to eat." And so she begins to fix him something to eat. Now, something else is going on at this moment. It's the Sabbath. You don't heal on the Sabbath. And so the Sabbath is over towards the end of that day at sunset. And this is what happens next. Luke chapter 4, verse number 40. Here's what happens. He says, "When the sun was setting, the people brought to Jesus all who had various types of sickness. And laying his hands on each of them, he healed them." Now, we can zip right past this. We can read this and kind of go right on past it. And it's like it didn't really, capture anything. But there's one part here where he says he was laying on hands on sick people. This was such a big deal. This is so significant in this time, and especially for a Jewish person, to actually touch somebody that was sick. I mean, now we know germs, right? We know germs, and this time of the year, especially, we don't want to be around germs. But for them, they weren't aware of the germs, but they knew the laws of Moses, and you didn't touch sick people. You didn't get around that close to them or anything. And here's Jesus. Jesus is touching these sick people. A couple of years ago, I had horrible sinus infection, and I thought about going to the doctor on Thursday, and I put it off. Maybe Friday, put it off, and so Saturday, I'm just dying, and I'm like, I gotta go. So go to an emergency clinic in the area. Never been there before. I get there bright and early so I can be one of the first people in. And so I go in, and I've never seen this doctor before. I go in, and it's a fairly large little waiting room that's there. And so I get in there, and I'm sitting in the area where she's going to do the examination. And she comes in, she's got a mask on and gloves on when she enters the room. And I'm in this corner of the room, and she sits in this corner of the room. And she says, "So, what's the matter with you?" I have a sinus infection. Oh. And so, started describing, the names and everything. And finally, when she felt like, I guess I wasn't contagious or anything, she walks over, and takes off her mask thing and pokes me in the cheek and she goes, ouch. Yeah, you got a sinus infection. And so it's just one of those things where, people, a lot of times, they don't want to be around germs. They don't want to be around sickness. And so here's Jesus. He's in the thick of it. He's touching these people. He's putting his hands on it. And in this culture, sickness and sin were connected together. In other words, well, Betty's pretty sick, she's really sick. I wonder what she did. I wonder what bad thing that Betty did that's caused her to be this sick, to have this problem. What is that? And so these Jewish people, their beliefs was sickness and sin were tied together. You must have done something terrible. And so here's Jesus, and he's putting his hands on sick people. And so, it's one of those things where, for us even, we do something wrong or something's going wrong in our life, and sometimes people will think, man, I wonder what they did to deserve that. And so, sometimes obviously our consequences do that, but here's Jesus. And our question would be this: how can you tell if a person has the power to forgive sin? Because you see, there were times when Jesus healed somebody, he said, your sins are forgiven. It wasn't you're healed, it was he would touch him and say, your sins are forgiven. And so, this seems a little confusing, but how can you tell if someone has the ability or the power to forgive sin? I mean, sickness and sin seem to be connected and tied together. And if Jesus could take away the sickness, could it be possible? Could it be possible that he could take away the sin also? And so that became part of the equation that maybe if Jesus can take away the sickness and maybe he can take away the sin, then that is that barrier between me and God that Jesus come to take away. Which means the end of the equation is that I can have a personal relationship with God. I don't have to go to the temple. I don't have to go to the synagogue. Is that what's going on here? And so, here's what happens next. Matthew talks about it. Mark gives us a glimpse of what happens next. But Luke tells the story also with a little bit more detail. Matthew's version, it's kind of short and sweet. It's just like, bam, bam, bam. Matter of fact, here's Matthew's version of what happens in Jesus selecting his guys. Matthew chapter 4, verse number 18. Here's what he says. He says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers. Hey, Alan, could you back this off on this monitor right here, please? Thank you. I keep. He saw two of his brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew, and they were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. All right. So now we know what they do. Jesus shows up and he says, "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will make you fishers of men." And at once they left their nets and they followed him. And so we read a little further, they kind of go down a little further, and there's Andrew and John, and they say, Andrew and John just kind of leave their stuff, and all of a sudden they take off, with Jesus. And so, I don't know about you, but it seems like there ought to be a little bit more than that. Trying to figure that out too? Yeah. Get a little closer. I don't know where it's going from. I'll work with it. But here they are. The four guys. It's as if Jesus walks by and goes, "Hey guys, follow me." And they kind of like, they drop their nets, they drop their jobs, they go, "Goodbye, Dad, see you later. We're going with this guy." I don't know about you. When I read that seems like it's a little irresponsible, doesn't it? And maybe like me, you've heard messages, when you just need the faith, you just need to believe, these guys, they just, drop their stuff, they're following Jesus and stuff. But there was so much more than that. You see, there's truth to, that there's more to the story in following Jesus. Now, fortunately, we've got Luke's story. Luke, writes, and he gives us a little bit more detail here. So, this is where, back to Luke chapter 5, we're actually there now. Here's the backstory. Luke chapter 5, verse number 1. Here's where he goes. There it is. Thank you. Luke chapter 5, verse number 1. One day, as Jesus was standing by the Sea of Galilee, he's talking about a lake, but it's the Sea of Galilee, with people crowding around him and listening to the Word of God. So here's our four guys. We've got John, we've got Andrew, we've got Simon, which is also called Peter, and so we've got, the guy and James right there. So we've got them all there and they're listening. Now, here's the thing. Our faith, your faith, it starts with information, right? It starts with information. That means asking questions. It means asking tough questions sometimes. And if the answer is, you go ask tough questions to somebody, and you're trying to find out more about who Jesus is or this whole, Christian thing, and they go, I don't know, you just need to believe. That's not helpful, is it? That's not very helpful. I mean, that isn't enough for most people. And so, here's the thing. You will not get all of your answers to your questions. And at some point or another, as you become more informed about the faith, and maybe you grow and get more information, yeah, maybe at some point there are times when you do believe. And it gets you through that. But it starts with information. And that was the same for these guys. It started with information. They're listening. They're absorbing this. And so he goes on, verse number 2. And he saw at the water's edge 2 boats. So you've got a big crowd. They're kind of pressing up against Jesus. He's up against the water. There's 2 boats sitting there, left there by fishermen who were washing their nets. Which tells us that, here's the thing, these guys fished all night long, because that's when the fish would rise up. That was their best opportunity. That was their livelihood. So why not be fishing at the time when we're most likely to catch fish? I don't know about you, but that's when I want to catch fish. And so they would drop their nets and they would fish all night long. And then during the day, in the mornings, they would string their nets out. They would repair them where they were ripped or torn or whatever. And they would get all the beer cans and all the seaweed and stuff like that out of there. And so they're cleaning all that up. It's the end of their day. So, verse 3. Jesus, he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and he asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. So Jesus is in the boat, they push off a little bit, they get away from the crowd, stood pressing up against him, and there's Andrew, and there's James, and there's John in the crowd, and there's Peter in the boat, with him. And so Jesus begins teaching, and he's preaching, and he's in this crowd, just absorbing it. And at the end of his message, Jesus gives an invitation. It's not the invitation we think. It's an invitation to go fishing. He gives an invitation to go fishing. He says, Simon, let's go fishing. Simon said, it wasn't an invitation to follow him. It wasn't an invitation to just believe that, although that may come later. It was just an invitation to, let's go fishing. And this is great. Verse number 4. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, he said, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Simon's been up all night. If you've ever fished all night, he's probably hungry. He's tired. He's like, I just want to go to bed. I'm up a little later than I expected to be, but now, Jesus, you want to go fishing? Jesus, we don't fish during the daytime. There's a reason why we don't fish in the daytime, because we don't catch fish in the daytime. We catch it at nighttime. And Jesus, we're professional fishermen. What was it you did for a living before you became the teacher guy that you are? Oh, I was a carpenter. A carpenter. Ever fished before? No, not really. Jesus, you see all these people that you've been talking to? They're still here and they're still watching. We go out and drop nets. They're going to think, that's ridiculous. That's crazy. Who does that? But you know what? You healed my mother-in-law. So Simon, verse number 5. Simon answered him and he said, Master. Which is interesting because this word he uses, master, here is more like we would use for mister. It was a term of respect. It isn't rabbi. It isn't Lord. It's a term of respect. He said, we've worked hard all night and we haven't caught anything. I mean, this is This is ridiculous, but I'm not going to say it. And we would do well to pay attention to the tension in this moment. This tension is in our lives also, because Jesus asked Peter to do, Simon Peter to do something that was so simple, so easy. It would take just a short bit of his time. But this one thing that Jesus is asking to do, it would be so important. It would be the jumping point for all to come. You see, we know how the story goes, right? We've heard the story. You're sitting there going, I know the story, I've heard the story, and I know it. You know, these guys had no idea where this would lead. These guys had no idea what hung in the balance. These guys were on the edge of their lives being changed forever. Or their lives being completely forgotten. Done. Over with. A generation, maybe two. Who were those guys that used to fish here? 2,000 years later? Absolutely not. Let me show you a picture here. Better if you can see it on these two screens here. You may not be familiar with that. It's a picture that I took. It's been 2 or 3, 4 years ago. We were in Rome, and we were visiting St. Peter's Basilica. This place is incredible. You can watch, you can get up there and get a little closer. I'm at the top of it, and I'm looking down, and the people are just itty bitty people. I mean, this thing is a monstrosity. It's almost unimaginable. In the 16th century, there was before that there was just a little bitty church there, and now 120 years it took to build this. I can't imagine building that now, much less in the 16th century. In that is a tomb. I would like to go to church each Sunday and there would be a tomb up there. You know, there's a tomb. Do you know who they believe is buried in that tomb? And they've done some tests, and they do say that there is somebody from the first century in that tomb. Peter. A church that is beyond imagination. And what's so interesting is in this very place where this church was, this is the place where it was built over Nero's circus. And so you kind of, what was Nero's circus? Was it like a circus thing? Nero was the emperor of the time, and he persecuted Christians. During that time, Christians were persecuted. He would put them in animal skins, and he would have them take off running in the arena and have wild animals to attack them and just literally devour them in front of the people. He would take some of the Christians and he would place them on spikes and impale them and put tar in their hair, and they would be the street lights. Right here, in this place. Peter. Recognition of Peter. Peter and Paul would be executed, if not at this location, it was very close by. And so, Simon Peter has no idea as he's standing here in this boat and Jesus asking him to go fishing. He has no idea that the future, his future, hinges on this. I'm sure he's thinking, man, it's going to be a waste of time. Why do I want to do this? I mean, this one little thing. And here's what it says about us. We have no idea. We have no idea what hangs in the balance of us saying yes to what God wants us to do next. We have no idea, however small it may be, we have no idea of the what or the who that hangs in the balance. What relationship will you impact? What relationship will impact you? You know, by simply just saying, I'll take that next step. I'll take that next step and see where this takes me in this journey of following Jesus. You see, I get it. Some of us, we've been Christians for a long time. And our Christianity can become stale. It can become boring. It can become, come on, preacher, give me something else. I've heard this story over and over again. Give me something, deep. Give me something that would just really challenge me. That maybe I don't know. Maybe some creed stuff. I don't know. What is it? What if we just got out of our comfort zones? What if we just got out of our comfort zones at times? If life is boring for you now as a Christian, you're too comfortable. You're too comfortable. And so it's step out of that comfort zone and move out of that comfort zone a little bit and stretch yourselves. And I don't even know what that is for you, because it can be different for each and every one of us. One of the places where we see this, and it comes alive so vividly, is when we take a team to Malawi, Africa. When we take a team to Malawi, Africa, lives are changed. And it's not the Malawians' lives that are changed. It's the people we take. And we challenge them. We challenge them to get out of their comfort zones. And it's so fun to watch, because you just see them, it's like, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know. That's not. And we stretch them and they step out of their comfort zone. And every time they step out of their comfort zones, you know what the end result is? Growth. Growth spiritually. It's impact. Impact in their lives and impact in the lives of others. It's a memory maker. You talk to every single person that's went, and people that got out of their comfort zones, and they'll tell you their story. Oh, I was there, and I've never done that before, and they challenged me, and I did, and I got to tell you, for some of you, you know this. It's life-changing. That's some of your stories, where you got out of your comfort zone, even just for a little bit, and now you look at where you are, and you think back to that moment. The crowd's looking at Peter. His partners are looking at Peter. What are you going to do, Peter? It's not going to take that much time. It's not going to take that much effort. Maybe a few hours in the scheme of things. And so here's Peter's answer to Jesus. He said, because you say so, I will let down the nets. That's what he did. Verse 6. And when they had done so, when they had taken the first step, when Peter took that first step, when he applied the teaching, when he decided, to do something. There was some cans of paint inside of this room in here. Most everybody in here, at some point in your life, you painted, right? You grab that can of paint, and if you're like me, that can of paint stays there for a while, because I hate painting. I hate painting. Hey, what's going on? Sometimes, our different family members say, hey, what's going on? How we paint? Nah, I just stick a stick in my eye. I just don't like painting. But that can of paint is nothing, right? It's a can of paint. But then you apply it. And what does that look like after you apply it? You see the difference. It's a can of paint, but once you apply it, you see the difference. It's so much bigger, so much more. And here was Peter. Peter decides to go fishing. He lets down his nets, and so at this moment, his faith intersected with the faithfulness of Jesus. Because something big happens. Here's what happens. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. How many of you guys that love to go fishing want to go fishing with Jesus? How many of you have ever prayed, Jesus, make one of those miracles happen? You've been fishing all day. Jesus, make one of those miracles happen. So, you got to go to the other side of the boat. Go to the other side of the boat, Jesus. Believe me, I don't reason why I say this, because I've done it. He goes on. This is how big this is, verse 7. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come over and help them. And they filled up both boats, so they were so full they began to sink. Verse 8. When Peter saw this, he said, we are rich. We don't have to work for the next 2 days. Peter immediately offered Jesus a 7-year contract with a 35%, partnership with benefits. And Jesus didn't want the deal. He said, something smells a little fishy. Thank you for the courtesy laugh. It really says that in the Bible? No. Here's what happened. Jesus' knees. And he said, who's going to clean all these fish? Fish was the farthest thing from Peter's mind at this point. Peter's on his knees and he says, go away from the Lord. Go away from me, Lord. Master was Mr. It was a sign of respect. Lord. Lord is now that rabbi, that teacher. And he says, I am a sinful man. You see, their assumption during this time was, in that first century, that God distances himself from sinners. That God is, way over here. And the religious leaders would even tell them, God's way out here. We have the high priest. Only one person goes to the presence of God. Everybody else is on the outside of that circle. So you distanced yourself from God. And God sends his son, Jesus Christ, right in the middle of sin. He's right there. And we see a glimpse of this in a little bit. See, Jesus came to establish a brand new relationship. Being a sinner was a prerequisite. There was a new thing coming. There was a new covenant coming. There was a new ethic coming. There was a new movement coming. Peter would be part of this new movement that we call Christianity. He would be the first person to go, hey guys, remember when? His assumption, like ours, was that sin distances ourselves from God. And Peter's right there in the picture. Verse 9. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch, the fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, his partners. And so then Jesus says to Simon, he says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And I think at this point that Jesus puts his big smile on his face as Peter's there right in front of him. And he says, from now on, you will catch men. Guys, come on. We're going to go change the world. We're going to change the world. Verse 11. So they pulled their boats up to the shore and left everything and followed him. They left everything and they followed him. Does it make a little bit more sense now? Does it make a little bit more sense than just, he walks by, hey guys, follow me, and off they go? Absolutely. These guys would end up dying. They would die with nothing, including regret. No regrets. They had enough information at the moment to begin to follow Jesus. They didn't have all the answers. There would be so many questions over the next 3 years, and there would be this sign, watching Jesus, their faith over and over again, intersecting with God's faithfulness. It didn't always go as they planned. They had their doubts at times. There was a time when Jesus asked them, he goes, do you want to click on follow? I mean, some of the other people are already clicked and they're already walking away. Is that what you want to do? Do you want to just leave also? And Peter, looks at the other guys and they're like, yeah, right now we kind of do. But Peter says, who do we follow? Because we're going to follow somebody. Where would we go? Because we're going to go somewhere. Peter later on would write a letter. You have it. 1 Peter. You want to turn there? 1 Peter chapter 2. Peter writes a letter. And he's thinking back to his time with Jesus. And he's thinking back to that time when Jesus was on the cross, when he was being crucified. And I cannot tell you, there was nothing more horrific than a Roman crucifixion. Nothing. Nothing more painful, nothing worse that you could imagine. We can't because we've never seen one, we've never heard one, we've never experienced one, we've never been around one, but these people have. And Peter writes this in chapter 2, verse number 23 of 1 Peter. He says, when they hurled their insults at him, at Jesus, he didn't retaliate. And when he suffered, he didn't make no threats. I saw him with my own eyes being crucified. And I'd seen other crucifixions. I've heard of other crucifixions. And this was not the normal. The normal was to scream out. The normal was to curse people. The normal was to blame people. The normal was to just plead and beg for mercy. Not Jesus. Jesus has a conversation with the guy on his left and the guy on his right. He goes on. Instead, he entrusted himself to who judges justly. Peter would say it was the most unjust act. It was Jesus who was without sin. Jesus that when he was arrested, I went away. And I kind of followed a little bit later, and I was close by where they were having their trial, a trial that was at a time when they shouldn't have it. It was a mockery of the system. It was against all things that the Jewish people believed in the rules. And I watched from distance, and I denied Jesus 3 times. Do you know? No, absolutely not. You don't know. Are you sure? Absolutely. He goes on. Says, I watched him endure a humiliating and painful death. When he was dead, I figured it was all over. But I discovered it wasn't over. It was the beginning. Verse 24. He said he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree. In other words, the cross. So that, why? So that we might die to sins that these people that he was writing to, who were told again and again by religious leaders, you're sinners, you can't get close to God. You're sinners, you can't get close to God. Only we can get close to God, but you can get close to God through us. And that there's this barrier that's there. And Peter says this barrier is gone, that Jesus paid the price for that, and sin has no more control over your life. And he goes on. He says, and we might die to sins and live for righteousness, that we can live to do the right things, that we can live to be good, that we can live to put others first, that we don't have to be afraid, that your past is exactly that. It is your past. You don't have to be locked into a sin and have control over it. He goes on, by his wounds you have been healed. This is what God did through Jesus. Peter would say, for fish tricks, that's nothing. I watched him die. I thought it was game over. For almost 3 days, we're sitting there going, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're kind of in hiding because we don't want to be next. And early that morning, on that third day, on that morning, the ladies, they left early out that morning, and all of a sudden they come back with something so crazy, so bizarre, that Jesus had risen. I couldn't stand it. And Peter would say, I ran to the tomb and I looked and it was empty. And my first thought was, he's risen. My first thought was, where did they take him? Where did they take him? And it wasn't until I saw Jesus that I believed. We had breakfast on the beach one day. I believed. You see, Peter would say to all of us, I'm so glad I chose to follow him that day and every day afterwards. How about us? Are we willing to follow him? Are we willing to follow him? You see, Peter took baby steps. And when he did, his faith intersected with God's faithfulness. It works the same way for you and I. So here's my question, or a series of questions. What's your next step? What's your next step? Is it maybe deciding to step across that line of faith, that maybe you've gotten more information in over the years and everything, and maybe today is that day for you where you say, you know what? Life's too short. I need to make a decision right now. I need to follow Jesus. And that that you would choose to embrace that gift that God has given us, the forgiveness of sin, that we can have this personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And maybe that's your step for today. Maybe it's to come back to faith. Maybe you've been running from faith. Maybe you've just said, I ain't got time for it. Whatever it is, maybe it for you is coming back to faith. It's saying, I need to re-engage. I need to get with a body of believers. I need to get that synergy that is there and to take those steps and to get out of my comfort zone. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a broken relationship. Yeah, you contributed to part of that. But but they did a lot more, So, maybe for you it's reconciling that relationship. Maybe making steps to reconcile a relationship. Maybe it's moral purity. Maybe you've embraced the world's ways and it's kind of exciting and for the moment, but inside of you right now, there's something that's eating at you. That this isn't right. This doesn't feel good. This isn't what I should be doing. Maybe it's just serving. Maybe your next step is serving. You've been comfortable. You are comfortable with where you are, and I need to do something. I need to do something unusual. I need to get out of my comfort zone. I can serve here. I can serve some people over here. I can whatever that is for you. Maybe it's stuff. Maybe you just, I work every day to get more stuff. As soon as I get money, I'm buying that new thing. I'm buying that new iPhone, iWatch, whatever. I want more stuff. And it makes me feel good for a little bit. Until it's old stuff. And you want more new stuff. And instead of getting stuff and it just, eventually being old and way, what if we were generous? What if we were givers of what God has entrusted us? That it became a difference in people's lives. What are you afraid of? Jesus would say, don't be afraid. And here's the thing. Maybe even this day and this moment, something so amazing hangs in the balance for you. That in you taking that step today, making that decision, I'm going to do, and you fill in that blank, that it is life-changing for you. And maybe it's life-changing to others. Peter, James, John, Andrew would say, follow me. You don't want to miss out what God has in store for you. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads this morning. What I want to do for the next few minutes is I just want you to reflect. It's so easy for us to pop up right now and boom out the door and escape all of this right now. And what's going on within your heart and your mind, because I do believe the Spirit of God is at work in you. So, right there where you're sitting, would you have that conversation with God? Maybe it's really nothing to do with what I just talked about, different steps. Maybe it's a different step for you. I don't know. Maybe it is crossing the line of faith. That's your beginning of your journey. I don't know. Getting out of your comfort zone, serving, giving, doing. I don't know. But I'm just going to ask that you reflect upon that for a little bit. Maybe it's having that heart-to-heart talk with God right there where you are. If you made a decision, it's important you tell somebody your decision to help you be held accountable. A little over a year ago, we made a decision to take a step, Kim and I did. And that step entailed leaving a career of 35 years that I love. I loved it. And investing more time here. And I'm excited about the adventure. I'm excited about what God has in store. I'd like to know yours, where you can share it with somebody else. There's accountability in sharing your next step. And if it was stepping across that line of faith today, man, I'd love to